day of liberation for our independence and volunteering. We believe that this day must be etched in the hearts, minds of all Barbadians. And it is perhaps there that I want to speak. Because the journey that we have taken in becoming a democracy,
this is the sounds of resilience
has perhaps been
here
taken
at the
for granted by too many. And
Day
yet,
of Resilience
our national
on the
anthem
day
asks
of
us
national significance
to be firm
here at the Border Square Freedom Park in Bridgetown. Right now,
I say
Prime Minister
often
Mia Mottley is
to
now
my
speaking
colleagues
to
in
us.
cabinet and parliament that true
So stay
transformation
tuned
only comes with scale.
as I bring
And the
this
question therefore must be, for us as a new republic, how do we imprint in the hearts and instill in the minds of our people the importance of true independence and emancipation. Marcus Messiah Garvey told us of the imperative of mental emancipation. And I have said to you and others many times that I carry the picture of Bob on my phone to remind me of the mission of my generation. I believe that those generations that went before us did a sterling job in creating the atmosphere where they could remove many of the legal vestiges. But the absolute imperative to emancipate ourselves mentally still lies with us. And we are going to have to address it year by year as we do day by day, to remind people that when you don't control your mind, you become the victim of someone else's agenda to shape, to make of you that which they want to, as if they were playing with plasticine, or as if they were molding something on the clay. And I want to speak to Bajans as I've used this day to do in the last few years. We have a duty to each other, to carry each other, and to care for each other. And that duty means engaging people where they are. And one of the things that bothers me is that these kinds of conversations take place on days like today and in places like here, when in truth and in fact, these are the conversations that should be taking place in every community, on every day, in the small ways and the large ways, to begin to understand that how we treat ourselves, how we treat each other, defines whether we have started to walk that journey of mental emancipation. That the process of democracy and the instilling of rights in our people cannot simply be about the outward aspects of it, but it is fundamentally about how we treat one another. You know, Bajans got a good laugh last week. We got a good laugh at the expense of what could have been life-threatening and taken for the gentleman who chose to rock the cradle to his future life. Whether you choose to reflect in a laughing way, many means that have come after, or whether you choose to be sober in your reflection, what is clear is that we have to ask ourselves, what could motivate someone to believe that they could continue to act in a way that not only puts someone else's life at risk, but puts their own future and life at risk themselves. I have asked some of my members of parliament to start a process of seizing and reasoning. And they start. And I don't want no media there. I don't want no press there. Because this is not a public relations exercise. This is not an exercise to be able to impress anybody other than to engage with people and to hear them and to share with them. Because where we are as a nation,
we have been singing to one time. Sing it out.
Because you really got baby. Buffaloes.
we didn't know how to reinforcement tonight, huh?
All my ladies, you know, with the buff bottom. You know, young man.
They thought that I was introducing the new ways of making the public speaking in Barbados. And maybe we should. The bottom line is that we have to decide how we're going to shape our future. Our individual future, our family's future,
Right, now the police can pull you over.
our country's future. And I am not satisfied that we are to use the language of campaign sufficiently organizing in our communities to make that difference. I speak about all levels of agitation and movement. The president of the NUPW, Kimberly Eggard, spoke extremely well this evening in speaking to some of the issues that confronted the movement. But beyond that, I've always asked myself, why most of the movements for the liberation of people in our country remain at the outer fringes of mainstream society. And we begin to ask ourselves, if we feel so proud to be who we are, why are we not getting more people into the organization necessary to agitate and to liberate the minds, the spirit, and the bodies? And the gender movement, and the gender movement for the better conditions of women continue to be that at a professional level, on a policy level? Or should we not be seeing more grassroots organization among our women, teaching women how to be independent, teaching girls how to say no? As simple as it sounds, the ability to say no speaks to the agency of an individual who is in control of their mind and their body. How do we raise the level of consciousness and not simply be consumers of products and services that enslave us in ways that distort our reality? How do we break out of the mold that saw us as persons who could appropriately be herded, appropriately be docile, appropriately be reserved, appropriately not manage risk? How do we expect to become resilient if we are not prepared to come out of the temple of our familiar? If we are not prepared to break new ground? If we're not prepared to collaborate and cooperate and to recognize that while individually none of us may have the capacity or the money, that collectively we can do great things. The credit union movement has shown us that. And under the leadership of Tom Adams, when he introduced for the first time the tax incentives to spur the development of that movement, some people wondered whether he was just being hopeful and what could truly come of it. But yet today we have a movement that has savings that is just under 25% of our GDP, that has 100,000 shareholders, more than a third of our population, and who must be given an opportunity now for greater economic enfranchisement as we seek to reshape the institutions of our country, particularly those institutions in the public space. And whether it is the airport or whether it is the Barbados Agricultural Management Company and the sugar factory and the different other power factories that go with that, whether it is other institutions in this country in the transport sector, whether it is in other areas, we have a solemn responsibility to move to the next level of enfranchisement, beyond the political enfranchisement, beyond the social enfranchisement of free education and free health care, to move solidly to complete the journey that has been started almost 50 years ago, but that has been slow. And that is the journey of economic enfranchisement. And this government is committed to ensuring that as we right-size the state and as we create the necessary conditions to allow us to focus on delivering to the people of this nation our responsibilities in terms of those sustainable development goals like education, like healthcare, like community recreation, like all of the ecological measures that must be put in place to allow us to enjoy this nation, that we on a parallel track create opportunities for ordinary Barbadians to earn through economic enfranchisement. And I have come on this July 26th to give you the assurance that this government will continue to see, hear, and feel ordinary Barbadians. And therefore the announcement, even in terms of the engagement of a mechanism to be able to enfranchise both the workers at the airport and those servicing the airport, is only but the start of the economic enfranchisement we promise to allow ordinary Bajans not to be simply tenants in their own land, but to be owners in the land in which they live. I want also to use this opportunity, because tonight is not a night for long speeches, Trevor. And you said, and Kimberly said, much of which, all that you have said, I can endorse. And while politics is the art of repetition, there is no need for me to repeat on those key areas. But as you heard, we have friends with us who have come to engage on the complex issue of reparations. And we have a situation where we are seeking to engage on this topic at a time when Europe itself is in the midst of war. And therefore we understand that the battle may be a little longer still than we would have hoped for. But there have been 2 conferences in Europe in the last month that have allowed us to break new ground. And I'm going to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until we begin to understand the significance of what has transpired. In Paris, with many of the leaders of Africa and the G20 countries, few from Latin America and the Caribbean, we were able to reach a pact for the people and the planet. And that pact recognized that we should not have to choose between the financing of the development of our people and the financing necessary to save our people from a planet that is literally turning inward on humanity because of the behavior of humanity with respect to the rise in greenhouse gases. All of us are are suffering from it. And in some instances, there are some whose experience may not be as severe as those who face the tragedy of having to move house immediately because of wildfires, or who lose all that they have, including sometimes family, because of hurricanes and floods. There are some who are asked simply to endure temperatures both at the highest and the lowest level that mankind really was not built to survive. And there's some like us who feel it in our access to water, and for whom the reality of being a water-scarce country is further compounded by all that is happening with the climate. And after that conference in Paris
Yes, guys.
last
As I said
week,
before, this is our Prime Minister.
all of
Neil
the
Motley,
countries of
that
Latin
is
America,
addressing us now.
Caribbean, Central America
Our Prime
met with the
Minister,
countries of
Neil
Europe.
Motley, addressing this
And we agreed there
sound of resilience
on a number
the
of
day
things
national
that broke new
significance,
ground.
nationally
And just as the Paris Pact for People and Planet
Golden Square,
broke
Freedom
new
Park,
ground in reaching
Cambridge
to
Town,
a
Barbados.
consensus that the international financial system
So
is
stay
no
tuned and
longer
enjoy.
fit for purpose, does not see us, does not hear us, does not feel us, does not accommodate us. The EU CELAC summit reached consensus on a few things that came to define the exploitation and the colonization of our peoples, our region, and indeed the genocide that took place both here and Latin America. The notion that extractive industries should be the mechanism by which the northern Atlantic countries engage with Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean was put on its head. And 5 centuries of a philosophical approach that said we are only good to extract the minerals or to grow the crops that would then be refined for others to extract real value from has been put behind us. Similarly, we agreed last week and endorsed all that the Bridgetown Initiative and all that the Paris Pact stands for, which is simply to have a more just financial system that lowers and levels the cost of capital and that removes the unconscious bias that would cause us to have to pay significantly more because of what are considered as risk, because of the absence of access to data or willingness to find the data necessary to be able to remove the risk and hence the premium, the increased costs that are accommodated with that. And then there was this glorious paragraph. Let me be the first to say that it is not sufficient and it is not where we ultimately need to go. But what I can tell you is that it is historic, because it is the first time we have had Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, but Europe in particular, agree as a collective on these words. And may I quote now from the EU CELAC declaration that we agreed to in Brussels under the co-chairmanship of Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves and indeed Mr. Charles Michel, the President of the European Commission. Paragraph 10. We acknowledge and profoundly regret the untold suffering inflicted on millions of men, women, and children as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. We underline our full support to the related principles and elements contained in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, including the acknowledgement that slavery and the slave trade, including the transatlantic slave trade, were appalling tragedies in the history of humanity, not only because of their abhorrent barbarism, but also in terms of their magnitude, organized nature, and especially their negation
of the essence of the victims, and that slavery and the slave trade are a crime against humanity. CELAC referred to the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparative justice. Now, this is not where we need to be, but this is a journey that has started. And this is a journey that will not stop. And I like to use the metaphor reflected in Earl Lovelace, who wrote that brilliant book that won the Commonwealth Book Prize. And if you haven't read it yet, read it. The book called Salt, that was fundamentally about reparations and reparative justice. And Earl took over 10 years to write that book, because it was not an easy expression of the soul. This journey will continue. And the message must go forth that whether it is us or the next generation or the next generation, the people of Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America will not forget the centuries of exploitation and abhorrent barbarism. And why do we in Barbados take this so seriously? And I'm not talking to you here in this audience now who are part of the cognoscenti, for want of a better phrase. I'm talking to the average Bajan. Because you see that place over there called Parliament. In 1661, it passed a slave code that became the basis on which black people were defined as less than human and exploited, not just in Barbados, but all across the then 13 states of the United States of America, and in other parts of the world where they use this as the basis for justifying the inhuman treatment to people of African origin and to the original inhabitants of the Americas, the various tribes of Indians as they were. And because the parliament to which I belong was guilty of such abhorrent legislation, we believe that we have a duty to pay forward, not just in Barbados, as we have been doing since we started to forge our democracy, from the Right Excellent Grant Lee Herbert Adams right back through to the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow with independence and all who have come thereafter. But we believe that we have a duty as well to carry along the rest and to work with the rest, because that piece of legislation led to the loss of life and liberty of so many. So my friends, this issue of reparations is very much a just and appropriate cause for the times in which we live. It's not about trying to identify individuals and linking individuals, but it is to compensate for the extraction of wealth, for the treatment of people, and to give the people in today's world the opportunity to live a decent life, recognizing that the extraction of wealth meant that when we took responsibility for our own affairs, we did not have the wealth that could build houses and schools and hospitals across the developing world, because much of the wealth had already been extracted to build museums and monuments and other vainglory aspects, not to mention to finance the Industrial Revolution, which is now at the forefront of the climate crisis. That is why we say we have double jeopardy. Because having had to bear the blood, sweat, and tears to finance the Industrial Revolution, we now bear the consequences, first and foremost, of what the Industrial Revolution led to, with the stock of greenhouse gases, putting us in a position from the melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic right back through to the rise of sea level that is affecting our country and our communities. Colin, you know in 6 months that climate migration is real. When people had to move from the foreshore because it simply captured the ocean, captured where people would have been living. And we take these things in our stride without connecting the dots. So now you see why I started where I started, by asking Barbadians to start the journey of scale. For active citizenship, as the Charter of Barbados demands of us. If you live in a house and you're only extracting from the house day by day by day, the house could eventually fall down on you. But if you start to take care of the house in between, and you fix this thing that's dropping down, and you repair the sink that's leaking, and you fix the roof tiles that fly off, or the galvanized that pull in, you can sustain not just the property, but the quality of life that the property gives you the opportunity to sustain. And this country is no different from that house. So that when I see a 16-year-old going to court, having been caught on camera saying, "I want my mommy," we begin to understand that we have a duty to remember that it takes a village to raise a child. This government, as we are about to reach to the point of engaging with education reform, and the Ministry of Education has been doing the early part. They did last month, asking people to just reimagine education. They have been engaged in training principals and education officers to be ready for the moment of the discussion. And they will come to the country by the end of August with the specifics that will allow us to begin to work through, will we go